Hi, I'm Sarah Whiting. I'm Dean of Harvard's Graduate School of Design, and I want to welcome all of you to today's event, Mayors Imagining the Just City. First, a quick reminder about some features you'll see in this Zoom webinar. Both panels in today's symposium will include time for audience questions, so feel free to submit questions into the queue at any time while the panels are taking place. You just have to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. We also have live captioning available for this event. To enable your captions, click the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. Before we begin today's event, I want to invite you to join us for some upcoming GSD public programs. On Tuesday, March 23rd at 7:30 Eastern Time, editors Mark Lee and Florencia Rodriguez will reveal the new issue of Harvard Design Magazine, number 48, coming together for a discussion with a panel of contributors to that issue. And on Thursday of that week, March 25th at noon Eastern Time, please join us for Bodies of Work, Activism, Gender, and Architecture, a panel discussion featuring architectural historians Ana Maria Leon and Torsten Lang. All lectures at the GSD take place on Zoom this semester and do require registration. More information about these events, as well as how to register, is available on the GSD's website. Today's event is supported by the Carl M. Sapers Ethics and Practice Fund. Carl taught professional practice at the GSD for almost 25 years and developed the GSD's first ethics course. When he retired in 2010, his colleagues and professional and academic established the Carl Sapers Ethics and Practice Fund to carry on his work and advance the conversation about ethics in architecture at the GSD. We're grateful to the entire Sapers family, as well as the many contributors to this fund, for their continued support of the GSD. And on to today's event. So tonight marks the 1-year anniversary of Breonna Taylor's death in Louisville, Kentucky. While tragedies like Taylor's have brought more attention to the spatial, social, economic, and health injustices in the United States, these biased disparities, often intentionally created, have existed throughout our country's history. Catherine Seavitt Nordenson's fascinating lecture last night on sanitary engineer George Waring pointed to the example of Seneca Village, a 19th century, mostly African-American settlement in Manhattan that was taken by eminent domain during the construction of Central Park. Even if injustices have been taking place across the entirety of our country's history, today they're more numerous, largely due to the fact that over 80% of our country now lives in urbanized areas, which brings diverse populations closer together and often does so in tension because of the economic stresses on our urban regions. These injustices have become more visible and more challenged thanks to different media platforms, but also thanks to work by people brought together by today's event. So one positive we can point to is that there's currently a lot of attention to structural racism and how it's affected our cities in terms of planning policies such as redlining and eminent domain, in terms of the siting of public infrastructures ranging from open space to transit, public institutions and services, including schools and necessary retail services such as supermarkets and pharmacies. In short, there's been a lot of valuable exposure of examples and analyses, but to be honest, there's been a dearth of proposals for how to produce real change. That's why today's symposium and the mayoral fellowship that grounds it are so very exciting. I really admire mayors. They're the political leaders of our urban lives. Designers, as I've always said, need to be generalists. We need to be adept at synthesizing different issues, challenges, and histories in order to improve and advance the built environment. And I'd say mayors are exactly the same. They have to communicate to anyone and everyone, and they have to synthesize social, economic, political, historical, cultural, and technical expertise. And they often have to do it one-on-one in front of their constituents. So they always have to look good. I'm very grateful to Toni Griffin, professor in the practice, director of the GSD's Just City Lab, and inaugural head of our new publics domain in the Master of Design Studies, for leading the Just City Mayoral Fellowship that took place over 11 sessions last semester, pointing the way to how the built environment could be reshaped into spaces of justice, particularly for Black communities. I'm also really grateful to the 7 mayors who participated in this program and the additional design advocates, professionals, and academics who served as a resource team for all of you returning today to participate in this symposium and share your experience and your knowledge with the school and the greater public. This collaboration between the GSD's Just City Lab and the Mayor's Institute on the Design of Cities, a leadership initiative of the National Endowments for the Arts and led by Executive Director Trinity Simmons, who joins us today, could not be more timely or more urgent. This program provided a critical opportunity for what we do within the GSD to have a direct impact on the world outside our walls, and vice versa. It's my hope that this collaboration is only the beginning of a broader network of collaborations that will make Just Cities the standard for what we expect of all of us, not the exception to what so many of us experience. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Rod Joy, who in February 2021, so very recently, was appointed by the Biden-Harris administration to the position of Chief of Staff at the National Endowment for the Arts. Fabulous, fabulous news. Ra was previously the Executive Director of Change Illinois, a statewide public policy and political reform coalition. Ra works to unite diverse individuals and institutions around the common goals of strengthening our democracy and promoting a vibrant culture of civic engagement. A civic entrepreneur with a proven track record as a consensus and coalition builder, Ra has a decades-long commitment to advancing the arts, democracy, and social change. His work has been recognized with numerous awards, and he is invited to be a frequent speaker on democracy, citizenship, and the arts in America. I'm honored to welcome Rod Joy today. Thank you for being here, and thank you for what you do at the NEA.
Hello, and happy Friday, everyone. I'm Rod Joy. I'm proud to serve as the Chief of Staff at the National Endowment for the Arts, and I'm pleased to extend a word of welcome to all those assembled today for this virtual symposium. For 55 years, the Arts Endowment has worked to strengthen the creative capacity of our communities by providing all Americans with diverse opportunities to experience and participate in the arts. We're just past the halfway point to the first 100 days of the Biden-Harris administration. Today marks day 51. I want to say how grateful I am to work for an administration that values and appreciates the presence of and support for arts and culture. I think that commitment to culture is not just represented in having strong cultural agencies, it's also reflected in the arts playing an active role across the federal government and in all aspects of civic and community life. Our entire agency is grateful to be in partnership with the U.S. Conference of Mayors to support the Mayor's Institute on City Design. We are also appreciative and thankful to be in collaboration with the Just City Lab at Harvard University School of Design to help center equity in planning and design interventions. Just want to say a word about some of the priorities of the Biden-Harris administration, which right now is focused on beating the virus, growing the economy, and advancing justice and equity. As many of you know, I'm sure all of the mayors are keenly aware, President Biden just signed into law a historic $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, the American Rescue Plan. I will say that the American Rescue Plan is a source of hope for the American people. And it's a really powerful signal, particularly from my perspective, to arts organizations and creative workers that help is on the way. And so there's a big focus now, obviously, on shots in arms and relief checks in people's pocket and getting schools the resources they need to safely reopen. The administration's also focused on healing the nation and the role that arts and design can play in ushering in a healthier and more hopeful future. At the NEA, that means right now lifting up and amplifying arts projects that fuel positivity, promote community solidarity, and contribute to public health and well-being. The Biden-Harris administration is also deeply committed to advancing equity, opportunity, and justice for all Americans. We're focused on how culture and design can animate the highest American ideal, the belief that we are all worthy, that we are all equal, and that we all count. We're focused on addressing issues of racial justice and climate justice and how design and creative expression can help us imagine a newer and better America. This is where I think this work intersects with the evolving visions of the mayors in this cohort. Together, we want to figure out ways to create cities and one nation where equity is paramount, where everyone's human dignity is respected, where all communities can thrive, and where all of our children, no matter where they live, can grow and achieve their full potential. I want to thank Jen Hughes, the head of design and creative placemaking at the National Endowment for the Arts. I also want to extend a big heartfelt thanks to all of the mayors for their participation. With all that's going on in the world today, it means so much that you made time and space to participate in this important initiative. As you lean into your roles as chief urban designers for your cities, please know that the National Endowment for the Arts has your back. More than anything else, we want you to think of the Arts Endowment as a ready resource, not just today, but every day. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to our friend and colleague, Trinity Simmons, Executive Director of the Mayor's Institute on City Design. Thank you.
Thanks, Ra. Dean Whiting, it's so wonderful to see you. Of course, we all wish that we could be at Gund Hall today. Sarah's a longtime friend and supporter of the Mayor's Institute. We were thrilled to have that extended when we created this program this year. Ra, what music it is to hear words like equity and justice out of the mouth of an administration official. We've not yet had the chance to meet in person, but we're very much looking forward to welcoming you into the Mayor's Institute fold. We're really excited to share with everyone out there today the culmination of many months of work last fall, really starting last spring. Really, the seed was planted about a year before that at a little convening that Toni held at the GSD before the world stopped spinning. That's what if we had legions of mayors trained in justice and the built environment and equipped with language and tools and policy, and like funding would be a dream, but also the space to revisit the core of the reason why so many mayors run for office. And it isn't to help a downtown that's doing pretty well, and it's not to attract business for the sake of attracting business or growth for the sake of growth. Mayors almost never run for mayor thinking about what they're going to run for after mayor. When you talk to them, you inevitably hear about the areas of their city that are being left behind and their version of a tale of two cities, no matter the size of the city or how seemingly prosperous the city. So we said, let's start with a small cohort. And at a fundamental level, I also want to drive home the question of why mayors. The audience here, primarily of designers. So why mayors? And when you're looking to put your work into practice, where does it have the greatest impact? Who are your natural allies? Who are the people that are making decisions that are closest to those being impacted by your projects? There are a myriad of answers to those questions, but one of them is mayors. Mayors are not new to this conversation. As Sarah pointed out, mayors are your natural allies, your co-conspirators in this work. But more so than that, if it's the architects and urban designers and landscape architects and planners that take a step back and take the 360 view, that challenge the paradigms, that encourage their gathered groups to reevaluate the very basis of the questions that they're asking in a project, it's the mayors that are doing that in their spheres. It's the mayors that are the conveners, the listeners, that overrule the specialists for the greater good, that critically still have the public trust. So we asked ourselves, what would a design justice curriculum for mayors look like? And how would they directly apply that to their cities? Mayors are already creating cultures of equity and justice in their offices, these mayors especially. And how could we bolster that work and further equip them, give them a safe space to noodle through thorny issues and give them language for some of their hunches? So for 11 weeks last fall, we did just that. These mayors that you're going to hear from today learned from many of your faculty members, from outside speakers, held open discussions, worked on manifestos of action, identifying injustices in their cities. They did this all virtually, taking time out of their busy schedules every week during the middle of a pandemic, because they're incredibly passionate about these issues in their cities. And what we found was that these mayors are intimately aware that many of their cities' challenges are highly concentrated in specific geographic areas. They're intimately aware of the local history of ups and downs on each block. They have an encyclopedic knowledge of the programs and policies that have been tried over the years. What the Just City Fellowship did was equip them with a thorough understanding of how these patterns played out in cities across America, of the common histories of injustice and policies dictated at all levels of injustice at all levels of government that have created and upheld them over the decades. And that these injustices so often fall across racial lines makes them complex and challenging, and above all, absolutely critical to undo. And there's no single program or policy that can undo decades of neglect and mistreatment. It takes a seismic shift in the way that government operates and the way it engages with its residents and values their knowledge of their neighborhoods, their hopes and dreams in their communities. And these mayors all came into office with a gut instinct that this shift was needed. And they know that, they know that surrounding themselves with smart and curious and creative people is the way to achieve meaningful change. So what this fellowship did was introduce these mayors to a group of professionals who've dedicated their careers to that seismic shift, towards using justice not just to build better places, but to bring justice to the lives of people in those places. And this requires people in positions of power and influence, mayors, to have a fluency in place-based fields like urban planning that have historically been used as tools of injustice. It takes a thorough understanding of the way those tools can be used instead to empower residents who've long seen the deck stacked against them. So what we heard is that this fellowship gave mayors the chance to take a step back and recommit for themselves and their staff and the public to take a bold stance on serving the people who've been left behind by government in the past. And we're so honored and humbled to work with these inspirational leaders. And there is no way that we could have done that without the bold and fearless and humor-filled leadership of our primary curator, Toni Griffin. Toni needs no introduction to this audience. She's a longtime friend and partner of the Mayor's Institute as well. It was the first call that I made with the idea for this fellowship, a little germ of an idea, but we immediately took off running with it. There's no question that the success of the fellowship is all a result of her involvement and passion. From here, I'm going to hand it off to Toni to lead us through the rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. What an extraordinary introduction by an extraordinary group of leaders to launch us off into this Friday afternoon of talking about cities, leadership, and justice. I had a set of remarks, but I feel like everyone who preceded me struck such important notes and chords in what I was going to say, in that I think I will move past that and simply welcome not only our audience, our sponsors, the NEA, the Mayor's Institute on City Design, our dean, but more importantly, our mayors and their staffs. It was such an honor and a privilege to work with you all over our 11-week curriculum in rich conversation about the legacies of injustice in our cities and in our policy making, the ways in which we can move forward in building allies and partnerships, the ways in which we can use design and planning to help you confront the current issues and upheaval that we're living with, and more importantly, how we could co-create together, building off of the work you're already doing, paths forward to more just cities for your cities, but in particular, looking at the Black and Brown communities that you each spoke so passionately about. So this afternoon, we're going to talk about some of your justice building work and hopefully recreate a little bit of the environment, the banter, the camaraderie that we all shared when we were in class together over the 11 weeks. And let me just say the attendance record of the mayors was extraordinary. Students should take note. These mayors carved out an hour each week over 11 weeks to be a part of this discussion with a host of other designers and experts in conversation. So welcome, mayors. It's so fantastic to see you all again and excited to dialogue with you. So for our first panel, for this first hour, 75 minutes or so, is around memory, place narratives, and the just city. Let me first introduce that we're joined in our first panel by Mayor Errick Simmons, the first Black mayor of the city of Greenville, and the youngest city councilman in 2007 to hold that office, I believe. We also have Mayor Yvonne Spicer, who is the first mayor of the city of our neighboring town, Framingham, and she was sworn into office January 1st in 2018. She is then next to a long-standing civic leader, Mayor Brent Williams, who is the 20th mayor of Union City. And joining the four of them are Mayor Benjamin, who's since been elected in a record turnout election in 2010, has made it his mission to create Columbia as the most talented, educated, entrepreneurial city in America. Now, I'm sure your colleagues are going to dispute that with you. We can get into that in a second. We're going to spend about 40 some odd minutes in conversation together with our audience. Please feel free to populate the Q&A with questions. I'm going to try to weave those in as we talk. And then we're going to be joined by Brent Leggs, who's the Executive Director of Saving Places, who's going to come in and anchor us in some additional feedback and knowledge around memory, place narratives, and the just city. So, my good friend, Mayor Simmons, I would love to start with you, if that's okay. Everybody have their mics off of mute, and we can jump right in. So, I want our conversation to orientate the audience to where we left off in the fellowship, which is you all beginning to talk about some specific kind of directions for the Black and Brown neighborhood that you selected in your city. And Mayor Simmons, I was so fascinated by the story you told of the South Side Ward 6 and the sort of legacy that it had around climate change and environmental injustice, and the effects of severe flooding in your community, dating back to the early part of last century, where Black bodies were literally used as barriers to protect against flooding. Were the first online to repair the harm of flooding that affected their own community, and that this neighborhood is still experiencing. So my first question to you is, how might we use these histories of people and place to push more comprehensive understanding and approaches to addressing the importance of climate change and infrastructure investing in Black and Brown communities and low-income communities generally? So welcome, Mayor Simmons, and let's get at it.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon. I would like to first thank my colleagues, Mayor Spicer, Williams, and Benjamin, good folks at the Mayor's Institute on City Design, NEA, Just City Lab, Harvard, National Design and Planning experts across the world, and all who have joined us this afternoon as we imagine the just city. And Toni, that's a wonderful question, and I thank you. But when you begin to break that question down, you begin to think about how to build a more equitable quality of life in place for Black neighborhoods and folks of color. And of course, I know these urban planners and designers know Jane Jacobs. And so she stated cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everyone. And we know cities from their origins were not created by and for everybody. Cities, big and small, urban or rural, north or south, whether you in South Carolina with my good friend, Mayor Benjamin, or whether you are here in Greenville, Mississippi, across this country, these cities have been subjected and continue to be subjected to institutional discrimination by and through local, state, and federal policies that have resulted in significant disinvestment to Black and Brown communities and historic neglect in infrastructure, public safety, employment opportunities, and other amenities. This injustice produces poverty, high crime, drug, alcohol addiction, depression, limited access to fresh and healthy food, Black neighborhoods replete with dilapidated housing, vacant buildings, vacant lots, and no to low recreational activities for our youth. Greenville, Mississippi is no different. A port city on the Mississippi River. We talk about climate. With about a 75% Black population and a 38% poverty rate in the city, we placed our focus throughout the fellowship on a neighborhood and a people that are no strangers to long suffering. A neighborhood with a 99% Black population, a neighborhood with a 35% unemployment rate compared to a 7% unemployment rate citywide, a neighborhood with a 70% of children living below poverty, the people whose parents and grandparents were severely mistreated, displaced, placed as barriers, and left for dead during the flood of 1927. We shine a light on the Southside Ward 6 community that has suffered from environmental trauma, severe flooding, with an equally traumatizing history impacting African Americans dating back as far as 1927 and moving as recent floods of 2011, 2016, and also 2018. And so that question still remains, how do you build that equitable quality of life? How do you begin to talk about and imagine these just cities? And in order to do that, you first have to take a pause to reflect and truly acknowledge where we've been to fully realize the possibility of our future. As James Baldwin eloquently stated, know from whence you came. If you know whence you came, there are absolutely no limitations to where you can go. We have acknowledged that, and acknowledging the past and realizing the possibilities of our future, you must imagine what a more equitable quality of life in place for people of color look like. Diversity, inclusion, equality lives within and surrounds the entire neighborhood. Neighborhoods are safe, they're beautiful, they're healthy, accessible, and just. Green infrastructure and complete streets, they are everywhere. Every member is valued, respected, and will be treated equally. Low poverty, low crime, access to quality healthcare, fresh food, a reduction of racial disparities, more investment, more employment opportunities, more recreational activities and events for youth, and community trust between authorities and the community with progressive policies to achieve greater justice. There must be intentionality placed on dismantling negative policies that create discriminatory practices and racial disparities in the Black community, and aggressive creation and implementation of progressive policies to achieve greater justice. And so just briefly, just talking about some of those policies, acquiring dilapidated and private housing stock to make permanently affordable, decent housing for low to moderate income families. We've done that here in the city of Greenville under this administration, as the city council donated a city park to create a state-of-the-art affordable housing complex for low to moderate income families. And the name of that complex is called the Reserve at Gray. Continue with reentry programs to gainfully employed returning citizens. We created a program called GREAT, GREAT, Greenville Reentry and Training Program, because we truly believe that our brothers and sisters that return back are great. This is not only an employment and workforce development program, but also a social justice program where it disrupts the cycle of poverty and incarceration. But a heavy importance is placed on the skills to do the job instead of the ills of one's past. Other programs and policies that will create those just cities are continue with state and federal partnerships to address infrastructure improvements needed to reduce flooding, particularly here, we're on the Mississippi River. To date, we've spent more than $100 million in local, state, and federal monies to fix aging infrastructure, with a majority of those funds going to disadvantaged areas. About $50 million spent in rehabilitation of other sanitary sewer infrastructure in Black and brown communities. A $16 million local and federal investment is underway for the Southside Ward 6 community, including about a $7.7 million grant from the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration, designating specifically these funds for flood management, control, and resiliency, given previous flood disaster impacts. Acquired dilapidated private housing stock and vacant land to create green infrastructure and safe and beautiful recreational amenities. And so our project, what our manifesto was the Southside Park Project, which is a hope and equity project that creates a state-of-the-art park with safe and beautiful recreational amenities by acquiring dilapidated and private defunct apartment complexes in the poorest area of the city, which is the Ward 6 area, with historic disinvestment in jobs, infrastructure, and education and recreation activity amenities. The previous owners of the apartment complex were sued by the city, and the city was the first in the state to sue slumlords, if you will, for deplorable housing conditions in which poor Black folks live. This area, didn't have a place where people to dump their garbage. They did not keep heavy lidded in common areas. It was completely deplorable. And so the owners are not doing anything. It creates a blight and an eyesore in this area of town. And so given that closeness to the levee and being situated in an area known for historic flooding, the project will address sustainability, climate change, resiliency, flood management, and also education and health. And so in short, to answer that question, how we build these just communities, Toni, we got to acknowledge the past, realize the possibility of our future, imagine the just city, dismantle negative policies, and create and implement policies that achieve greater justice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Mayor Simmons. And as I said, I found the narrative of the history of that neighborhood that's had, centuries of, environmental challenge and trauma, really compelling me to think about climate change and climate action really differently. It's the same phenomenon. We are labeling it differently professionally. And I've always been curious about whether the citizens that live in that community know that history, whether state officials know that history, and might that move us towards a different value proposition by how to invest in those communities. And so I want to come back to that. I've also been asked that while each of us are not speaking, we should put our mics on mute so that we're minimizing any feedback for our audience. So I want to come back to that, but let's go on to Mayor Williams in Union City, Georgia. So Mayor, you started talking to us about what was once a rather affluent neighborhood just outside of Atlanta, and it was affluent with Black families as well as white families. But as folks started moving out of the center city, as first ring suburbs started to experience some of the same vulnerabilities as inner city neighborhoods, this neighborhood once that surrounds Raymond Drive is a great example of that trajectory and the flux of neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color in particular over the last decades. So for you, one of the really important values that you brought to the table was this sense of pride of place. the pride people need to feel about where they live, be prideful of their contributions to their neighborhood. So what are some of the ways that pride of place can be restored in this community that you aspire to work on or that you have already worked on? These neighborhoods that have fallen victim to both harmful public policy and also harmful narratives that are connected to their current condition.
Toni, Raymond Drive is such a sticking point for me because, as you stated, it was one of the affluent areas of the city for many, many years. And as you stated, once a lot of the change that started to happen in Metro Atlanta and surrounding areas, people were moving out. And a lot of the owners of those properties started renting to anyone and anybody. And now it has practically it has turned into a very hardened area that causes great concern. And the greatest concern it gives to me, to the point, Toni, that I was so excited about this opportunity, because it did bring back a bit of shame for me. Because this is one of the areas that once I was elected on the city council, I said, we need to address this issue. Well, I didn't have as much, I don't want to say power or say so, but a lot of buy-in from a lot of my colleagues at the time, because I was one of the newer members on the body, and they felt like, I was a real renegade, if you will. But my concern was, this is a primarily brown community. How can I, as a Black man, advocate for equity if I'm not making sure myself have not addressed the issue of equity in my own community? So certainly there is a lot of great things, that we have started to corral together since we started with MICD and this Harvard discussion in putting together a real plan of action. And certainly I'm looking forward to a lot of the work that we will be doing as we move forward, because those are families just like your family and my family. They deserve an opportunity to experience hope, the hope that all of our communities deserve. In the spirit of hope is what we all work towards, but we hope as individuals, we hope as families, we hope as a city, as community, but we want to make sure that we provide a hope of the peace of a promise that all of these individuals deserve. So dealing with the slumlords, if you will, those are things that we're going to continue to battle and eliminate, but also create opportunities for better education, access to healthcare, access to, and my good friend Mayor Simmons just spoke about it, fresh food opportunities, but also one of the biggest disenfranchisements that I am seeing is lack of transportation opportunities. Many of these families don't have adequate access to public transit. So we are working with a robust plan with our Georgia Department of Transportation, our MARTA bus transit system as well, to make sure that we address those issues. And a lot of the policies that have been put in place, some need revisiting and some need to be eliminated. So those are things that we've got to do. And as I share with my team and certainly a lot of the members in my community, as long as I am mayor, as long as I have breath in me, there will be change in all of the communities to make sure that we provide the level of quality of life that every individual deserves. Not just some, not just part, but every individual that's in our community. So it's incumbent upon us as leaders of our communities to make sure that we provide a vehicle to that piece of the promise that we all seek to gain.
Thank you for just putting in your own personal reflection. Sarah said this, and I've said this to you all several times. I have such extraordinary admiration for those of you who choose and make the decision with your families to run for this office, and then to run, and then to win, and then to hold it, and then to run again. Because it does require such a personal conviction, I think, to be successful at it. And I'm going to want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about these choices that you make. But by choosing the neighborhood you did, and why I wanted to group you all together, is because these places have narratives that are in a trajectory. And we need to move towards a values-based and a real asset-based approach to how we invest in these communities. And so how we bring that more forward as we seek better design and planning solutions, I think is a really interesting aspect and approach to planning that I know our students are very interested in. So I want to talk about that a little bit more. And so as we continue to talk about neighborhood histories and place narratives, I do want to return now to Mayor Benjamin, who is the mayor who is ending his term coming up soon. And he introduced to us a neighborhood called Greenville, which in 1948 was established for returning veterans, Black veterans, in fact, from World War II, and later became one of the most prominent Black neighborhoods in his region. Suburban flight and aging populations have left the neighborhood vulnerable to some decline. So this is a neighborhood that's steeped in a very specific Black place narrative with a number of assets. It was a strong middle working class neighborhood. So now that it is starting to change, how can this neighborhood's history, a place built for Black people, be used to reattract population and investment in a way that retains ownership by the Black folks who established it and those who seek to enter?
Sure. Well, thank you, Toni. First of all, I haven't announced I'm not running for office either. I'm just joking, Toni. I'm just teasing you. It was too rich of an opportunity to not get you there. And I'd already tweeted out that Vince was stepping down, so I got 250 likes already too. It's amazing. And so I don't know what's up there. I will tell you, it's wonderful to have spent this time with all of you over the last several months. I'll repeat what Mayor Simmons had to say. The thank yous to all of the parties who made this special. It is awesome when you have when you can use the term co-conspirator as a term of endearment, because that's exactly what we have been doing, working to try and upset the apple cart. You mentioned the history of Greenville, which is a unique place, and I'm sure everyone has some information on the various communities that we're presenting on today. But the Greenville community was a planned community formed in 1948 as a result of the provisions of the GI Bill, or what was called the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944. And this neighborhood was built for African American veterans, given the opportunity to buy homes for their families and rebuild their lives. A unique act of the U.S. Congress that actually applied to the African seed and the American son. It also provided, obviously, for college and educational training for these primarily these men and their families, and provided loans to buy homes. This unique idea when the promise of opportunity is actually fulfilled, because we can all very quickly, anecdotally, and clearly lay out hundreds, if not thousands, of opportunities when things just don't work out well for people of color in this country. But this unique opportunity to actually establish a brand new neighborhood and to pour some of our taxpayer dollars into creating this neighborhood created a very unique and special place that began to thrive not only economically, educationally, became a political force. 1948 also happened to be the very first year the African Americans were allowed to vote unfettered in the Democratic primary, which was the only real race in South Carolina at that time. In the mayor's office, I have wonderful pictures on the wall of literally legions of people dressed in their Sunday best in that very first election when they had a chance to vote because of the Elmore versus Rice decision. Now, I say that to say that the question about this neighborhood's history is not only unique, but I think very indicative and telling of where we are in today's society, that if in fact you give people just a fair shot. I think that's something folks don't realize when we talk about words like equity and inclusion, is that we're talking about opportunity, giving folks an opportunity to truly participate in the American economic experiment and tell those stories in ways that are truly edifying. It's amazing what you can get done. So part of our investments that I'll reference briefly in the Greenview neighborhood and in the broader community just around Greenview have been also intentionally educational. Back in 2012, we launched an initiative called Our Story Matters, Columbia SC 63, along with the mayors of Birmingham and Jackson, Mississippi, and Memphis and Washington, D.C., to begin to tell the story that would begin to create the kind of ties that bind, that attract people back to our respective communities. We focused on initially on celebrating the 50th anniversary of a number of historic events that we would be celebrating in 2013, the integration of the University of South Carolina, the Edwards versus South Carolina decision that still taught guaranteeing 187 students their right to protest at our state capitol, a block away from me. But then we began to expand this Our Story Matters, and if any of you have time, I encourage you to go to ColumbiaSC63.com and understand what we're talking about here. But we used it as to weave in the story of the Greenview community and how that educational and economic and political force grew, that literally as elections were determined over the next several decades here in the state, you had to wait for the Greenview box to come in to determine who would become governor. You hear wonderful stories about the gubernatorial election of 1978, how until Reverend C.J. Whitaker, who became the de facto leader of the Greenview community, the head of the North Columbia Civic Club, and a leader in the Democratic Party, until the votes came in, you wouldn't know who the governor of this great state was, because that's what had happened and happened because of Greenview. So then when you look at it to use that history as a tool to try and attract families back to this wonderful and proud place, we make all those wonderful strategic investments that my colleagues have already talked about, investments in the public realm and high quality parks. We have a brand new community center, a large community pool, a water park, tennis courts, baseball fields, all new or relatively new, but constantly reinvested in creating a place where families will be attracted to. We've used community development block grant monies and other monies to try and incentivize and make the cost of home ownership low. We work with our regional transportation authority first to sustain it, and then also making investments in multimodal transportation options to address the issue that Mayor Williams talked about. So making all the investments that make it an attractive place for people to want to live, but then also telling the story that I think overlaps and overlays very effectively with what we're dealing with right now. Not only the greatest pandemic since 1918 that has highlighted some of the great disparities that exist in the American economy, but the greatest economic disruption that we've seen since 1932, and obviously the greatest social unrest that we've seen maybe since 1968 because of systemic racism and police violence. We have this wonderful opportunity to tell the story in a much more robust manner. And I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that, about some of the things we've been doing literally in the past week or two. This neighborhood is the home of our leader, Jim Clyburn, the majority whip of the United States Congress. He's a resident there, and there's a street that we named just over a year ago in honor of his late wife, Dr. Emily England Clyburn. We believe these constant investments and constantly telling the story, the fact that our story matters, will continue the trend that we're seeing of family members coming back and reclaiming their birthright. We know, as we've watched the challenge of gentrification happen all across our country, particularly in our immediate urban cores, that oftentimes people of color are the last ones to come back. And we've got to find ways to accelerate that trend and create the attractiveness to try and bring these young families back to Greenview. So I was trying to specifically, Toni, answer the question that you asked about the neighborhood's history. But we've got to continue to try to help maintain awareness of the very unique story of Greenview.
Well, what I appreciate about the answer you just provided, Mayor Benjamin, is I think you successfully made a really connect tie to the value of narrative and the value of place. What attracts us to place is neighborhoods, and then the house. And knowing the core of the neighborhood is just as important as assessing the types of amenities that are there. And so by starting the process of reminding us of the narratives of place, which, by the way, this neighborhood is quite unique to the extent that during that time, there were also a number of public policies that were intentionally excluding Black folks from place. And so in most cities in the country, I don't know if that's my feedback or someone else's, I apologize if you hear it. In many cities across the country, Black folks were excluded from place and consolidated to very segregated places of the city. But those places too have very important narratives and values and seeded Black entrepreneurship, Black development, Black ownership, but are now also the places that see the deepest devastation. And we don't know those stories from the past that help to anchor more value in place. I thought you did a fantastic job of connecting those. And so I want to bring now Mayor Spicer in, because your neighborhood that you selected, Southeast Framingham, was the most diverse of the neighborhoods that we've talked about, and that you have a multi-ethnic community that you wanted to address that also has a lot of immigrant populations in it too. So you're dealing with issues of nationalism, race, and ethnicity as a part of your community. So I can imagine that cultural narratives, cultural norms, how culture and narrative show up in place and the aesthetics of the place is really important. So I wanted to ask you, how do you work to ensure that these different cultural narratives and norms and identities are welcomed and welcoming, and that people fully participate in the preservation of or change in their community as a distinct cultural groups or as a collective?
Thank you so much for that question. First and foremost, I want to say it has been an absolute pleasure working with all of my colleagues from across this country. I've learned so much about them, their cities, their passion, and also some great ideas that I can certainly borrow and steal from them as I move forward. And as was mentioned, my city is a new city, and who gets to be the first mayor of a brand new city, which an honor, a privilege, but a daunting task. And certainly during a pandemic, it certainly added another element. And trying to navigate within my city and thinking about, the cultures within the community and the different lenses they look at the community through. Recently, over the last 2 years, I really wanted to hone in on some of the things that people value about our community. And one thing that frequently comes up, it's our diversity. People will overwhelmingly say they value and appreciate our diversity. And Framingham is located 20 miles directly west of Boston. It was originally a suburban community that people flock to, even though as a town, we have a rich history in manufacturing and millworking. But when you think about people coming to our community, a good number of our folks that have immigrated to Framingham live in Southeast Framingham. And that's been an interesting dynamic within the community. One of the three things that I've tried to focus on, and that's accessibility, culturally relevance, and as well as demonstrating value added. And so when I think about accessibility, how do you engage people? How do you keep them engaged? It's really, can they communicate? And so that goes back to translations. When we put out information, job postings, information, we make sure it goes out in multiple languages. Roughly about 45% of our residents, English is not their first language. And that is one of the other things that I look at to not only engage, but make people feel welcome. The other thing is it's safe. You know, I will acknowledge there are a number of people in our community who may be undocumented and they live in our community. So finding safe spaces in people they trust and meeting them where they are. Frequently, I will attend things on a Sunday afternoon because certain cultural groups, that is when you're going to engage with them, or after church, or I will attend things in houses of worship. So those are work closely with those pastors to engage and inform and try to figure out the best way to get information out to the community. And the other thing too is that childcare. You know, you want someone to attend an event, they have to find someone to care for their children. So really trying to make sure that when we can hold meetings, but also provide opportunities for people to have childcare. So culturally relevance. This is the other thing too. You have to be respectful of the lenses in which people engage in your community. You know, for example, meetings that always happen at 7 p.m. If you have childcare issues at dinner time, or you work another job and you happen to still be at work and you can't participate. So trying to find those spaces where people can effectively participate in communities. And the other thing too that I've known this for years, and you don't just bring one person to the table, you bring cohort groups to the table. That way they feel supported in that environment. And so, I love the richness of my community, whether it is from Latin America, South America, Eastern European, but all of that flavor within Framingham makes us the rich community that we are. However, this particular, there are particular census tracts in our community that have not thrived in a way that I feel that we can. We do acknowledge some of the shortfalls, but we also say, how do we keep meeting them and their needs? And that goes right back to the value added, the demonstrating the value added that people bring to the table, whether it's their cultural influence in restaurants, whether it's their influence in the way in which we celebrate in our community. These are the things that we need to highlight. And as many of my colleagues mentioned, the richness of any community is making sure that everyone has an opportunity. And that's one of the things that is clearly very important to me. So, when you think about providing incentives for people to participate. That is another thing that is under discussion, because you hear, if I have to attend this, I can't go to my job. So how do I incentivize you being able to participate fully in the community? Over the last several years, that I've been mayor, and we keep in mind we've been a city for a little more than 3 years, so we're actually a little more than a toddler. We're a toddler city, and we're still trying to find our way. But clearly over the last year and during this pandemic, it really highlighted some targeted efforts, whether it's security and programs, whether it's really bringing on people on board that can meet folks where they are in that given moment. Because I definitely think that there is a great opportunity, especially at this moment, as we have a chance to recover, rebuild, reimagine what we can be as a community. And truly, I intentionally chose this part of Framingham as because in my community, there are $1 million homes and homeless shelters. And these two census tracts that I had focused on, these are the places where I feel we need the most infusion of energy and effort. And that's my intent, to continue to do that, to engage and to make sure that everyone feels they get a seat at the table and they have a voice at the table. So I live by truth, and as being the people's mayor and being the mayor of all the people, so that is something that I value greatly.
That's a perfect segue into a question now bringing you all back together that I want to launch. But I also would like to remind our audience, if you have questions related to this discussion that you'd like to put into the Q&A, now would be a good time to do that, because we have some time to be back in conversation. So it's great to have you all on the screen. These mayors had a really good time together in talking during the course. And so I want to see if I can recreate a little bit of that banter and maybe start where you left off, Mayor Spicer, by noting yourself as the people's mayor and that you have to balance all these constituents. You know, as Trinity sort of set up in the beginning about why we set this up, as Sarah and Ross set up about the immediate challenges we were in and the moment we were designing this program and that you all decided to join in, there were compounded crises that you were facing. You're probably facing them right now as you're sitting in this Zoom room. But they were deeply and really acutely centered on our most vulnerable populations and Black folks even more specifically. And so as mayors, I wanted to ask you, and again, Mayor Williams, you know, sort of put himself out there a little bit by talking about how his whole personal relationship to this work. I wanted to ask you all, how difficult is it to take on the issue of injustice and name it as such for one or multiple populations or places in your city, while also trying to balance the needs of all of your constituents? You know, we're in this heightened moment of looking at redress for Black Americans in particular, but there are other Americans who are suffering as well. How do you sort of balance how you do that or how you take that on, either for a particular type of neighborhood or a constituent? And how is that shaping the way in which you are growing and revitalizing your cities?
I'd be happy to jump in first.
Fantastic. Thank you.
No, I think there's got to be a commitment to the idea that first of all, words matter. Kind words heal. That I used the word edifying earlier. That if you're authentic with the people that you serve in a diverse community, and that means the diversity of income that Mayor Spicer mentioned, diversity of experiences, race, gender, whatever diversity you're talking about, but you speak to people always in ways that bring people together. It's amazing that folks will gravitate towards that authenticity, and they realize that although we live in a world that's complex and oftentimes very difficult, that we are indeed interconnected and interdependent, and that these incredibly complex issues, many of which took literally hundreds of years in this country to deal with, and some that preceded the birth of this nation. I used birth of the nation intentionally. Are complex issues that require complex solutions. I will say this, that using edifying language, speaking to the needs of the whole city, helping people understand that we're interconnected and interdependent, and that literally as a crow flies, you know, across the railroad tracks or 1 mile away, that if that neighborhood's not healthy, neither is your neighborhood healthy. And constantly speaking in those terms. And I would also say this, we also have to pay people the respect of not underestimating them. Our constituents may not be rich, but they're pretty doggone smart. And many of us have had many experiences, familial experiences, literally watching families take nothing and turn it into something. Watching someone take a paycheck that runs out well before the end of the month and still make ends meet. So when you're sitting down, you're dealing with complex issues of trying to help a community understand why you're supporting the redevelopment of this great tower downtown. It's new development, this new commercial development or residential development. It might even be focused on students at the University of South Carolina. It doesn't hurt to actually sit down and actually talk about taxes and the millage rate and how the resources from this $40 million project, 63% of all the tax rate there is going to go into the public school system to make sure to meet the needs of kids all around. What it's going to do to help fund a more just response and comprehensive response from your public safety agencies. How this a geographically limited investment actually meets the needs of the whole. When you break it down, you start breaking down your millage rates and exactly telling people exactly how much is going to neighborhood schools that are nowhere near downtown. It's amazing how a light flips on, and then people start to get it, and they understand it. They don't speak city speak like we do every single day. They're not inside city hall running through millage rates and the like. But you sit down, you explain it to people, and they get it. I mean, they get it. So I think always using edifying language, recognizing that the kind words heal, being authentic, and realizing that what you say in the northeast side of town, you got to say downtown, you got to say on the west side, because people pay attention to that, and particularly in the world of social media, everybody knows what you're saying wherever you are, and again, never underestimating people, helping just explain to them how you're using their tax dollars, how you're using the public trust to help make the entire city stronger, and people gravitate towards it and they appreciate it. And then I think you can build a much more thoughtful, just, vibrant, and equitable community.
Yeah, let me put a little spin on that question from an audience member and then give one of the other mayors an opportunity to similarly respond. Someone is asking, do you feel that there are trade-offs or compromises that you're going to have to make to achieve?
Yeah, I
could take that on.
Yeah, I think, first of all, my good friend from South Carolina did an outstanding job in explaining it, but I guess particularly with the trade-offs, I guess it's easy when you truly understand that real equity real equity is creating fairness and justice on one hand, does not create inequality on another hand. It really, real equity make it balanced for every member of a community. And so, yeah, some folks look at trade-offs, particularly over the last, 2 to 3 years. You've had a lot of rhetoric around where I'm losing something, and from a national level, you have statements that make people, you put certain members of a community against other members of the community when everyone needs to understand that we're all one community. And if, we here in Mississippi in the Bible Belt, and I listen to a lot of, rap songs and stuff like that. So Mo 3, he was killed in Dallas. He had this song with Bootsy that says, everybody ain't your friend, everybody ain't your partner. But the Bible teaches us that you should love thy neighbor as thyself. You ain't got to be my friend and you ain't got to be my partner. But if you truly understand that members of the community are your neighbors and you want to treat them truly like yourself, like you would treat your family, your mama, your daddy, we begin to have a level playing field to say we should treat people just as human folks with dignity. And when you do that, you don't get to this battle of I'm giving you something and I'm losing something. It is treating folks fairly and understand the history of this country when policies are created and we're trying to level the playing field based upon data, based upon urban planning and designing and things like that. It's not like I'm losing something. When I help another brother or sister, we all are being helped, and it creates a greater community for the general welfare of everyone. That's the highway.
Mayor Williams and Mayor Spicer, would you also like to respond to this question of balance and or trade-offs to achieve your just city goals?
Well, I tell you, I really appreciate hearing Reverend Simmons because that was certainly on point. Because one of the things that we have to realize as mayors of color, and it's not about gender, it's not about color. We as a people of color, we've seen and have studied the disparities that have taken place in our communities. Now we are put in the driver's seat, and we are responsible to make sure that history is not repeated through us. How dare us stand up for equity and inclusion and diversity, and we continue to allow it. So we've got to make sure that the playing field is not only balanced, but everyone is included. So,
That's right.
as been said already, about being the people's mayor, we don't get hung up in the party of this person or that person. Whether you voted for me or not, I'm still your mayor. And please know, I'm going to do right by you each and every time. It doesn't matter how you feel about me personally. I owe it to you because that is the duty that I stood up for when I put my name on the ballot. So, it's all about making sure that fairness and balance is for everyone.
So Mayor Spicer, I'm going to allow you to kind of respond to that too, but I'm going to tag on another question from our audience. There are about 3 more questions I want to get in from the audience, so let me keep building on this. Because you're touching on some important values. And my good friend and colleague, John Raim, who's planning director in San Francisco, is asking a question based on his experience that has been when you're using planning and design tools, are really only effective at addressing inequalities and getting to justice if we first rebuild trust in government, which has been dismantled sometimes actively by administrations and has eroded, right? And so you're the first mayor in a city, a new city, so to speak. What are the specific ways that you all have rebuilt that trust as an important value? And I think some of you actually identified that as one of your Just City values. So how does that factor into getting to these Just City goals? This is then going to lead to some specific questions that some of our audience members have about the strategies you're using. But let's start with trust building and see if a couple of you want to answer that question.
Well, and I will say trust is something that is crucially important, especially in the world of government and politics. And the notion is that I will do what I say I will do. And that comes with, a cultural lens that we all look at this word. Your word is your bond. Your word is what, put your mark on, and to tell the truth, to put forth, information in a way that says, you know what, I may not have all the answers today, but I'm going to keep working on it. Or if I need to change things, I will say, we tried this, we're going to switch gears and do something different. And also bringing people to the table, making sure that people are included within the government with diverse lenses to look at this work through. And I agree so wholeheartedly with Mayor Benjamin. Some of the folks that may not have economic wealth, these are some of the brightest people I've ever met in my entire life. And so rather than using labels to separate, use language to include, instead of using words, and one of my community workers who has a wonderful organization in Framingham, instead of at risk, they use at promise. And that is something that is so important to think about this as not an us against them, or if I give up something, my rights are going to be diminished. It's how you build trust. You have to deem yourself trustworthy. And that is how, and I work at it every single day. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it. I engage with the community as much as I possibly can. And these are the ways in which we continue to have a different lens to look at government and how people can participate and access government,
Right.
So.
Would anybody else like to offer up any examples? Yeah.
Well, I'll say very briefly. Of course, Mayor Spicer is the distinguished educator. Vince Williams is a real preacher, and I was about to pass the hat for Simmons earlier too until he put a boozy. I'll get my money back out the pot. So I said, "Oh Lord, the mercy." What Mayor Spicer said, I think Vince mentioned it earlier too. I think the first of all, the humility expressed when you're engaging with the public does so much to build trust. It's okay to not know everything. It's okay to say I don't know. It's okay to say sometimes, because we're not used to that as politicians. We think we're supposed to have all the answers. To say I don't know, but let's spend some time talking about that. Let's see if we can help solve this problem. I think I do believe that mayors bring a little bit more to the table because we tend to represent more diverse communities that are not gerrymandered. We may have historical demographics, but we're not gerrymandered. So we're used to being problem solvers. But first of all, the power and humility and not knowing goes miles towards trust building. We have to be constant learners. And I will tell people that as you elect people, never to confuse confidence with competence. Okay, just because someone acts like they know the answer, they don't know the answer. But I think the humility also underscores the fact that we know that our formal authority and our moral authority comes from the people that we serve.
That's right.
I think if you constantly express a servant spirit, but you got to do what you said you're going to do. People are looking for the proof in the pudding. But if you constantly express that, it helps to build trust. Again, I think it's easier on a local level because literally people see you. They're going to see you in church. They're going synagogue or mosque. They're going to see you at the grocery store, at the traffic light. I get advice and counsel on how to run the city. That's the power of being the mayor. But if you understand that you have your moral and formal authority from those that you serve, and then you step completely into the role that we are indeed the constant architects, not only of our city, but the framing that so many people have of what America is supposed to be, as we try to build this more perfect union, that goes miles towards building trust. But it does require us to again be humble enough to listen. Grandma said you got 2 ears and 1 mouth for one reason. You're supposed to listen twice as much as you talk, and it's amazing. That if you do that the process of trust building, which is a process, it doesn't happen in one engagement. It gets better and it gets stronger. And let me tell you this too: you want to build trust when you don't need it, okay? Because crises will come, and when the crisis comes, you need to have that deep well of trust built up.
That's right.
To dip into it and say, you know me. You know us. Yeah. This is what we've been trying to do together. It is essential. And I want to thank your colleague from San Francisco for asking that question.
Yeah, that was a great question. And part of how we build trust, even as a planning director, I remember someone telling me I was walking to church. They said I could be late to church. I worked with them and I needed to answer the questions. So, making the space for building those relationships is important. So we've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to take a series of questions and combine them into one, and you guys can pick off any aspect of it and then end with a question. So part of building trust is, as Mayor Spicer said, doing what you say you're going to do. So let's kind of pivot to strategies. So there are a number of questions that audience members are asking about, how do you invest in comprehensive planning? How are you investing in your waterways and your ecological systems? How are you helping to ensure housing security? What type of progressive small business or tax policies are you thinking about that can help support minority businesses that keep these businesses rooted in these Black neighborhoods that attract Black families back to these communities? What are some of these strategies? So we were asking about comprehensive planning, housing security, small business investments, waterfront development. Anybody have anything that they're doing in any of those spaces that they'd like to share example?
Well, real quickly, let me say this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So we've partnered with our Congressman Benny G. Thompson to do a series of model contractor development programs where in the 2nd Congressional District here in Mississippi, here in Greenville, we train women-owned minority small businesses on how to procure state contracting and federal contracting. The local folks are already at the table. I'm at that meeting, but also our budget is there. And so we're telling folks these are ways that you can tap into the city budget with public infrastructure, public works, if you got this type of company. If you're selling toiletries and janitorial supplies, our 6-month bid list goes out, every in the timeline in which they go out to help minority and women-owned businesses that way. We also have done small emerging business conferences where we've had the U.S. Small Business Administration here, folks from the governor's office and everyone there, our bankers for financial literacy, to talk how to get a loan, how to get a line of credit. So to give our small businesses and women-owned business the capacity that they need to be competitive in applying for and procuring local, state, and federal contracts.
Let me also add that there's, in the same vein of strategies, there are questions also about designing cities for children and how are we thinking about young people in our Just City equitable aspirations work. Any other kind of strategies?
And thank you for that. When you talk about designing cities for children, that certainly beefs up the need for a much more robust parks and recreational opportunities, but also after school and daycare, working hand in hand with single mothers and single fathers who need assistance when it comes to being able to go to work and not worry about working all week just to pay for daycare. So we've got to come in and remove some of those barriers. So we work with a number of our senior organizations here in the area who love, because they love children. And many of them are retired educators and they want to participate in that way. But certainly it is time for us to look at how we budget to make sure we're supporting our small businesses, our businesses of color that are trying to get a foot up, to be able to participate. But as you know, COVID has really pushed a lot of the things that we had already started implementing and hope to move forward with, such as some of our capital projects and those infrastructure things that meet the needs of our community. So that's why when we shout out, help is on the way, that's real talk, because that will allow us to not only get back to the business that we were trying to provide these level of services, but even to do more. So I'm excited about where we're headed. I'm excited about the Biden-Harris administration to be able to let folks know that help not only is on the way, but help is here. So that there are a number of things that we are certainly supposed to do for our communities, and we're going to do them because people depend on us.
Yeah, let me layer on to this question in case Mayor Benjamin Spicer or anybody else wants to respond. And this comes from another good friend and colleague of mine, Sean Rickenbacker, who is the professor and director of the J. Max Bond Center at the City College of New York. And he is referencing a comment Major Benjamin made and speaking about authenticity and the need for informed and increased literacy around public policy like taxing, et cetera. So to the panel, particularly if you're thinking about strategies, how do we foster new productive public imagination and engagement and participation, and how do we deliver these new just narratives to our constituents?
Sure. You got one ahead, Mayor Spicer.
Well, I just wanted to say, I'll let him speak to authenticity. It is really engagement. We've created in my city a government academy. And through this academy, citizens can participate in this to learn about governance and how each aspect of our city government is run, from how budgets are made, how money is spent, to all of the various municipal departments. And that has, from doing this program for over the last year, we've actually encouraged people to participate on boards and commissions. And as a result of having the confidence from the Government Academy, they have gone on to apply and be accepted to be on boards and commissions. So it's engagement, it's giving people a space and opportunity that's safe, and also it's doing it more than once and frequently. And as I said, bringing cohort groups of folks together.
That's a fantastic example. Thank you. Mayor Benjamin, do you want to respond as well?
No, I believe strongly that. But thank you for the question. That you have to be aggressively intentional about including people, and it's a lot more difficult now to get information out than it used to be. We all remember when we were younger. There are three middle-aged or older white men who show up on the news at 6 p.m. or 6:30 p.m. and they'll tell you what the news was, and everybody had the same information at the same time. Maybe you pick up something from your favorite DJ or shock jock on the radio. But now our citizens literally, you walk into a room with 20 people and they're getting their news from hundreds of different sources. So you got to find ways to make sure that information is being pushed out to so many different unique demographics based on different data analytics. And it can be very difficult sometimes. So I think you have to be very creative. You have to still be willing to do old school grassroots, get out into the community. As we were going through our planning process, we literally did I think our folks did well over 100 sittings all around the community, going straight into our neighborhoods to make sure that people understood how our zoning and planning maps were being changed and how they were being changed with a focus on creating diverse and inclusive communities. To the previous, and you also have to do it in a way that allows people who still don't trust government to be able to engage with you. The downside of the internet and places like Twitter is that it gives you not only anonymity and reach for some people who want to cause trouble, but sometimes people who may have had other run-ins with government, other run-ins with the law, they need anonymity and reach just to get a question answered. So creating those safe spaces for people to be able to engage with their public officials is so important. We've made investments in housing programs using community development block grant monies to serve as leverage, 20% of a loan that the bank provides the other 80% to help people get into homes with in Columbia, in some cities, no listening, maybe you can't buy a home for $120,000, but with $500 out of pocket, you're able to get into a low interest loan into a home here in Columbia. And we've been able to grow that program. It was started by my predecessor, but we've been able to grow it aggressively. Now I have about $130 million loan portfolio. We've invested heavily in green infrastructure. Prior to 2020, the toughest year that we'd seen in a long time was 2015. It's when the Mayoral and I were murdered in Charleston. It led to us bringing the Confederate flag down here in Columbia after numerous protests. We were worried that we'd be Charlottesville before Charlottesville was Charlottesville. We lost a police officer here in the region in a very serious and heinous crime. And we had the greatest natural disaster the city had ever seen. 11 trillion gallons of water fell in the Carolinas. 45 dams broken, 641 roads damaged. We lost 19 precious lives. But in response to that, our council turned around and passed a $100 million stormwater initiative and passed the very first green bond for stormwater in the history of our city, and the very first standalone stormwater green bond certified green by the Climate Bond Initiative in the country to begin to invest in green infrastructure to help people understood that here in the heart of the Deep South, we can make those investments and make sense. And I'll say this: a few years ago, we are the city with the largest water sewer infrastructure in the state. And a few years ago, we became the largest water sewer system that happened to own a city because we've been putting so much money into our water sewer infrastructure. Every single time we go to market for a bond deal, when we're issuing bonds to build public infrastructure, we make sure that there's an African-American investment bank at the table, either senior managing the deal or co-managing the deal. Every single deal has African-American bond counsel or co-bond counsel on the deal. Every single deal has African-American or minority underwriters counsel or co-underwriters counsel on every single deal. We are very intentional in making sure that our procurement practices reflect the values of our city, which is that we got to build an inclusive city. Sometimes, I'll be frank, it costs a little bit more money to make sure the team is broad and diverse, but we're building capacity that then allows these partners to then to grow and participate that much more in our economy here in Columbia.
Yeah, those are both such equity intentional sort of strategies you put forward. So thank you for that. There's one last question which just requires a word, but I think in the spirit of caring for one another, particularly in the year we're coming out of, I really would love to ask Karen Feinberg's question. Answer it in one word or so. We're then going to go to our respondent, Brent Leggs, and then we're going to come back for some closing remarks from all of you, which will also be very brief. But let me ask Karen's question, which if you're open to answering, please do, in a word or two. This role that you are serving is really 24/7. So wondering how each of you do self-care. things that help you decompress, disengage, distress. Movies, walks, books, cooking. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about cooking in class. So would anybody like to offer up one of their distressing disengagement tactics?
Cooking.
What do you cook?
Everything. I do.
Mayor Simmons is being modest. He laid out his
Dressing, mac and cheese,
His
barbecue.
food is
I
the
mean,
envy. His food is the
yeah,
envy of this
yeah.
class.
We're all waiting for our Uber Eats delivery where we are. These folks had no shortage of humor during our session, and so I think they are surrounded by family and friends, and even the camaraderie that they've amassed during their 11 weeks together has offered, I think, a number of spaces of decompression for them. So thank you for that question. It was quite caring. I appreciate it. You all are going to stay tuned. We are inviting now Brent Leggs, who's the Executive Director of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. Envisioned as a social movement for justice, equity, and reconciliation, the Action Fund is promoting the role of cultural preservation and telling the nation's full history, while also empowering activists, entrepreneurs, artists, and civic leaders to advocate on behalf of African American historic places. Brent, welcome to the conversation. You've been listening to the last hour, so we'd love to hear, your insights into what you've heard connected to the work you're doing. For the next 10 minutes or so, and we're going to come back together and wrap up this fantastic panel. And thank you, audience, for your questions. Brent, take it away.
Thank you, Toni. And I just want to say to the mayors how inspired I was listening to you talk about creating a more just American city. There were two words for me that seemed like themes, almost a through line through your conversation, and that was reclamation and equity. And given that this session is really about history and narratives, I wrote down that history and narratives provides us with the data, wisdom, and examples that's all the more important in this moment that empower and help us to advocate on behalf of African American historic places and Black communities. I also was inspired when you mentioned your visions for creating a new civic identity and that you were leveraging environmental justice, pride of place, ownership and entrepreneurship, and infrastructure development as that strategy. So I want to offer a fifth priority, which is historic preservation. And I want to highlight some of the work that's happening nationally to help preserve African American historic places, to provide that equity investment in Black communities. And in essence, preservation practitioners, we help cities manage change in ways that don't disconnect the community from the legacy of its past. And you'll get a sense what I'm talking about now. Again, I have the good fortune of being the founding executive director of the largest preservation campaign ever undertaken on behalf of African American historic places. It's called the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, $25 million campaign to invest in 150 Black communities and preservation projects. And I'm delighted that we are in partnership with the Ford, Mellon, JPB, and other foundations. And this really is a revolution in the U.S. preservation profession. You see this image here. This is the inspiration that led to the creation of the Action Fund. It was a cultural moment of reckoning. We also remember this cultural moment of reckoning from the summer of 2020. This is the historic Decatur House in Washington, D.C., a National Trust historic site. An unnamed protester would write these words in the shadows of the White House, and it says, "Why do we have to keep telling you Black Lives Matter?" So our work through historic preservation is to answer this question. And we do that with this mission that we are about expanding the American story. We are working to uplift the contributions of African Americans in American history within our own understanding of history, preservation, and social justice. We are a platform for creating positive social change in American cities and communities, but we also are working to increase both the cultural and financial value of our history and the cultural assets that stand to tell our story. Preservation is equity. So our signature pillar is a national grant program, and these statistics affirm that African American historic places continue to be underfunded and undervalued. I'm sure that you all can think of historic places that sit in your community that haven't fully been leveraged, both to stimulate a creative economy or to tell a fuller local narrative and story. But almost 2,500 proposals from more than 2,000 Black communities requesting almost $250 million. So I hope you are seeing the image with the Paul Robeson House in Philadelphia. $4.3 million has been invested in 65 communities nationally. This organization sits on the west side of Philadelphia. They have been an all-volunteer organization for more than 3 decades, and our investment to help them hire their first executive director will strengthen their potential to become the true cultural anchor for this community. And it also helps to demonstrate the exceptional stewardship of Black communities. So in historic New Orleans, there's a historic district in the Treme neighborhood. This district was created not because of its architectural significance, but because of the cultural importance in this neighborhood. Unfortunately, Black homeowners were being fined through code violations for not maintaining their houses to a certain standard. We thought that that was an injustice. So we partnered with the Preservation Resources of New Orleans, who piloted a micro grant program that is covering the cost of exterior renovation, is working with youth to actually help restore these historic houses. And some of the funds are helping to pay down the tax delinquency and some of those code violations. I believe this has the potential to be a national model to confront this example of injustice in the historic built environment. So I'm sure many of you have heard of Vernon AME Church, that is the last standing remnant in historic Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is really the perfect example where we want to reclaim our narrative. The narrative over the last 100 years has been one of racial massacre and injustice and violence. Yet we want to ensure that we are balancing public memory, that we are leveraging the power of place to create that sense of pride. So we don't want to forget that Tulsa and historic Greenwood was once considered the Black Wall Street, that it was once a vibrant and thriving economic center of power. That is the culture that we're also working to preserve, to uplift this community and to ensure that they are moving forward in that legacy. I'm proud to say that we have partnered with the National Endowment for Humanities and a coalition of 6 other funders to pilot this year a $1 million HBCU Cultural Heritage Stewardship Initiative. And we just made announcements a couple of weeks ago, invested in 8 HBCUs. to fund 2 campus-wide preservation plans and 6 individual building plans. And Jackson State University, which you see here now, is one of the recipients of a $150,000 grant to conduct a statewide campus plan. And this will empower HBCUs to understand their cultural assets, help inform future capital investments, and help them understand how they can be a stronger preservation advocate in the broader neighborhood and community. So in October, we released our new research. It's titled Preserving African American Places, Growing Preservation's Potential as a Path for Equity. You can see the statistics on the right side, and I encourage you to read this. Home ownership rates are lower in historic African American neighborhoods. But look at the statistic, 35% more demolitions, 25% fewer building rehabilitation projects. We're lacking the investment. But when you combine that with our earlier research in a publication called Older, Smaller, Better, 50% of minority and women-owned businesses occupy historic commercial buildings. It's more affordable. We have to ensure that we're retaining affordable commercial space in historic Black neighborhoods to allow that part of our community to thrive. We have a program that's called Hope Crew, stands for Hands-on Preservation Experience. We work with youth in paid positions, introduce them to preservation trades, and they have the opportunity to connect to history in places that they probably never would have had the opportunity to visit or to learn from. And you see a gentleman helping to repair the historic windows of a building that was designed by architect Albert Cassell on the campus of Morgan State. Or this young lady helping to paint the home of Nina Simone. This is a strategy for creating paid positions, professional development, but also the stewardship of African American cultural assets. Now I want to highlight briefly preservation through demonstration projects and co-stewardship agreements. Now we've all heard of Nina Simone. She is considered a revolutionary in both jazz and civil rights. This is her birthplace in Tryon, North Carolina, has a population of 2,500. The beauty of this project is that a Black woman's cultural legacy and life is being leveraged through historic preservation and the stewardship of this site to grow a new creative economy in a rural community. That is the power of place. That is the power of Black history. That is the power of a Black female story. And what's also important is, I'm sure in your cities that there are so many African American historic sites that look like this, simple, unadorned vernacular structures that some might erase or demolish if they did not understand the significance of this place. There are other places like the home of John and Alice Coltrane in New York. I share this because it's a special place where John composed A Love Supreme. Alice recorded her first 5 albums in the basement studio. But again, it's reflective of the simple architecture and the vernacular of the Black experience. What's interesting here is that when this was threatened, the city used their open space funding to acquire the site. They zoned the 3-acre land as a passive park. They then helped to establish a new nonprofit, transfer ownership of the building to them. And after years, and in partnership with National Trust, they are ready to finalize their stewardship plan for reusing and programming this space. That can be replicated in your community. Last bit is I just want to highlight the role of advising mayors and how they have leveraged historic preservation. Hinchliffe Stadium. This place, you wouldn't imagine, it is associated to Negro League baseball history. Today it stands as the only National Historic Landmark in all of baseball. It's sat vacant for 20 years, and we've gone through a significant and comprehensive planning process. But I want to highlight this because there were so many in the community that wanted to demolish this site. But because of this history and because of the commitment of preservationists, this is today a $100 million redevelopment project led by a Black real estate developer who has majority ownership. He's a Harvard Loeb Fellow, which I am just thrilled by. It's Baye. And it's mixed-use development, so it goes beyond just the renovation of this cultural asset. And this highlights how federal, new market, and other tax credits can be used to help revitalize a community. Same thing, working with the mayor of Richmond, an African-American mayor, Toni, and advising him as well as the community in bringing life to a once erased Black historic asset. It's called Shockoe Bottom in Richmond, Virginia. And then last, I want to highlight the need to build the capacity, the technical capacity at the city level. And I'm delighted that Mayor Randall Woodfin would create under his administration a new position. It's Director of Cultural Preservation that now has kind of transformed to a Director of Preservation and Social Justice. But this person oversees the renovation of the A.G. Gaston Motel and is leading the development of an equitable development plan for the Birmingham Civil Rights National Monument and District. So in closing, I want to leave you with this. If you are looking to reclaim and to fully leverage equity as a value and preservation, create that new staffing position at an executive level so that that person has the authority to move forward your vision for revitalization and community engagement in historic neighborhoods and to support the renovation of historic sites. Promote rehab and revitalization. Many times we are leaving equity investment through new markets and federal tax credits on the table. Conduct a citywide inventory and document your historic assets. That is the first line of defense to ensure that your civic identity and historic narratives, exist and are understood. And then last, co-create equitable development plans that fast-track revitalization and that moves forward a futurist vision for Black communities through the power of preservation and our history.
Brent, thank you so much for those thoughtful reflections of the mayor's conversation and these really important and useful lessons and tools and resources for deepening the power of place, the power of Black spaces and places and Black narratives. I want to give a tremendous thank you to you for joining us this afternoon. And just the warmest wishes and appreciations to the Honorable Steve Benjamin, Errick Simmons, Dr. Yvonne Spicer, and the soon-to-be re-elected Honorable Vince Williams. It's been a pleasure working with you over the last 4 months. I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much for your thoughtful, candid, and honest reflections about building a just city that's rooted in trust, preservation, authenticity, empowerment, and pride. We will be taking a 15-minute break, returning for our second panel around inclusive and dignity economies, a full 15 minutes. Please enjoy that. There will also be a poll that we encourage all of our participants to take, asking you about what you believe are the 3 most important values that are important for your city to become a just city. Thank you all, mayors, and we'll see everybody back here at 3.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Take care.